Welcome to another episode of the Endurance Podcast with myself, Alex Rhodes, and Dr. Tim Podlogar. We hope you enjoyed our most recent episode where we spoke about caffeine and mainly an opportunity to talk about coffee, which is probably our second passion on this podcast. But if you haven't listened to it yet, head to either Spotify or our YouTube site and take a listen. And of course, again, Tim, it's sunny and we're doing another podcast. What's happening in the UK?
Hi, Alex. Are we in the same time zone? Because it's not sunny outdoors.
Maybe, well, you're a bit more north than me, so I think it's like the south of France down here.
Well, it's not sunny whatsoever here in Birmingham, so
maybe it's like you've seen the Addams Family where there's a cloud over the house. Maybe that's just what happens around Birmingham, and yeah, we get all the good weather.
Probably.
But have you been out on the road? Have you been in the lab this week? What's going on?
Oh yeah, I've been to the lab this week, but last week I was pretending I'm a nutritionist at the World Tour race. But I was just there as a guest and pretending to do some work.
But I mean, the summer is here, and we are how many weeks away from the Tour de France now? So
it's the end of next week.
So we're pretty close. I knew it was a couple of weeks. So we've got that to do. We've got the Summer Olympics. There's loads of things that are going off right now. So it's a pretty exciting time to be involved in all of that. Is there anything exciting that I know research moves real slow, but is there anything exciting that you want to share this week that's been coming out of that world?
Not really, just that in 1 week of not being able to ride my bike, I am feeling actually really good on the bike. So perhaps sometimes you need to take some time off the bike and then continue training.
Well, that is the perfect lead into what we're going to talk about today. And we are very fortunate to have a guest with us who is Mario from Sisu Training. Mario's a triathlon coach that's got quite an incredible palmarès and a vast amount of experience. So we'd love to welcome you on the podcast today. Hey, Mario.
Hey, Alex. Hey, Tim. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy and I'm very excited about being part of the show because I like that. I like the last episode about caffeine. It was great. With so many laughs. When Jean-Pierre was talking about the 4 espressos before studying, it was a good part. I like that.
Nice. Well, we're glad that you enjoyed it, and we're going to have a great discussion today because we're going to touch on the realms of on the topic of overtraining, and of course, the details. And in a way, it's quite controversial in that does overtraining exist, and what do we see in athletes? And I'm sure with the amount of athletes and the range of athletes that you've worked with, you've had some great insights into this. But first of all, let's just tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, how you got into it, and we can take the discussion from there.
Yeah. My name is Mario Schmidt-Wendling. It's a very strange name, I know. And I'm living in Frankfurt in Germany with my wife and our four children. And I'm like a dinosaur in triathlon right now because I did my first triathlon in I think it was in 91. And then I had a period of being a triathlete until 97. Then had a prolapse in the spine and took 1 year off. Started studying sports science in Frankfurt. And then a colleague, he took me to a cycling event, and I was there as a spectator. And from there on, I was totally hooked. I was totally on fire, and I decided to be a cyclist. And first of all, on the amateur level, and then I had the chance to sign a contract as a pro continental rider. In this time, it was called GS3, and I was riding 4 seasons as a cyclist. And in the end of 2004, the team had financial problems in July, and I was too bad to get a new contract during that time for 2005, and so I decided to stop being a cyclist, and then started my business side of being a coach in 2004, and turned back to be a triathlete, and this is where I come from, and from there on, from 2004 until right now, it's 20 years. 20 years of coaching, primarily with triathletes, some cyclists, but the main focus is in triathlon. And there are almost no beginners, more long distance athletes. A bunch of pro athletes since years, and that's it.
Nice. So, I mean, you've experienced it firsthand, and you've also, been pretty successful in terms of your coaching career as well. And am I right in saying that you've had some pretty good successes in your coaching career as well? Some world champions, some age group champions. So pretty high level in terms of the ability that you use. And is it just the high end ability, or that you coach, or is it quite a range of the past 20 years of coaching?
Yeah, I did in the beginning. I did almost every level of athletes, and with the time and getting more experienced, I tried to find a niche where I could get into it, and this was long distance racing, because I'm passionate about Ironman. I'm more focused on Ironman or Iron distance racing, and right now we're coaching. My colleague and I, we're coaching athletes. He's more on the beginner side and more on the short distance side, and I'm a little bit more on the ambitious age group or elite age group athletes and pro triathletes.
Awesome. So you've seen it all. So you might have.
I've seen it all. I've seen so many things which helped me to write a book, and it was published in 21, I think. Yeah, 21, and it's now available in English as well. It was published in March in English, and I'm really happy about it, because I think it's more a practical book about my way of coaching, and all my experiences is in that book. It's not a scientific book; it's more on the trivia side. But I have hundreds of resources in the appendix. But it's more like a workbook, and I would like to have it that the athlete is carrying it around in his bag, and if he needs some support advice, he can pull it out and read it. You read the section, and this is pretty successful in Germany right now, and maybe in English as well. I don't know, but I'm glad that I didn't have to do the translation, because my English isn't that good, I'm happy. I'm happy right now. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So today what we wanted to talk to you really about overtraining, and we'll try and skirt past the controversial question of whether it does exist or not, and maybe we can talk about that a bit later on. But overtraining as a principle is being an extreme fatigue state whereby our performance declines. So being in the realms of long distance triathlon, the demands are pretty enormous there. And we think that, some of the pro cyclists do a lot of hours, which, yes, they do. But equally, they are not quite weight bearing. And the demands of long distance triathlon as well are quite great, with the running aspect and having to juggle 3 disciplines. How common is it? What do you see with the athletes that you work in terms of being overtrained, if we want to call it that?
Yeah, as Tim already mentioned in our little talk before recording, is there any evidence that there is existence of overtraining, or is it just a word? And I'm not sure if it's existing. I've never seen it in my so-called career as a coach. I had a personal experience in the year 2003. I had to do so many road races as a cyclist because some teammates were injured and were sick, and I had to adjust my race schedule. So I had around 75 days of racing at the end of July. I was totally fucked up almost. So I was really tired, and my resting heart rate was about 65 or 60 compared to a normal 40. But I could easily go on the bike with 90 beats per minute and riding 35 kilometers an hour, but I wasn't able to push harder than or higher than 125, 130. And my maximum heart rate was during that time around 200. So I was really fatigued, really tired. And after that season, it took me about 11 weeks to get back to a normal state. 11 weeks without doing any kind of sport. Maybe except hiking. I was 2 or 3 times hiking, but nothing else. Just laying around and being lazy. But from my personal experience, I'm not sure if we can call that overtraining. I would prefer saying it's under recovery. And as a coach, I've never seen that. Maybe I have a good balance between load and deload, or load and recovery. And I think it's maybe it's too excessive used that term overtraining. I mean, it's in the nature of endurance sport that we need some kind of fatigue, some consciously provoked fatigue. And from time to time, at different phases in the year, it's definitely a must-have. We need that because if we rely on the principle of supercompensation, we can discuss it in a different way. But if we rely on that, and after fatiguing an athlete, there's the concept behind it that the athlete is getting stronger afterwards, after that fatigued season or fatigued phase. And I think it's quite normal being fatigued if you're doing an Ironman and you're leading up to that race maybe 6, 7, 8 weeks before, because the load is very high, and intensity is coming into it, and maybe this is part of it. But you only have to, as a coach, you have to focus on that kind of fatigue, and you have to be in a dialogue with the athlete and read between the lines, maybe, to see if the athlete is really over the edge, or is he still capable of handling that certain load. So this is sometimes it's on the edge. Sometimes if it's too much, it has negative effects. But we definitely need a phase of fatigue.
And I think that there are lots of different terminology. Like you said, there's overtraining exists. People use overreaching, where we've gone that little bit too far, but we can recover from it. And then there's the classic, we're not overtrained, we're just under recovered. And there's lots of aspects that go into recovery, of course, that we will come on to discuss. But let's say, okay, then we go into a bit more of a fatigue state that we wish to. How common is that with certainly the athletes that you've worked with over the years? Does that happen more with a certain group? Elite athletes have such a great load, but they have more time to recover, whereas the amateur or the higher age group athletes, again have jobs, have all kinds of other things going on, but don't quite do as much hours. So kind of what are the common things that you have seen, and what have you seen that helps recognize it? Like you mentioned, elevated resting heart rate, suppressed heart rate during exercise. Do you use things like biological markers like creatine kinase, interleukin 6, things like that? So, yeah, what's your experience with that?
Mm-hmm. From my perspective, as a coach, you're responsible for the load of training. But from my perspective, it's more that the daily stresses like work, family, etc., maybe financial problems, etc. This causes an extra load. I can't anticipate when I try to plan the training, and so these factors, leave me sometimes with a question mark, because I want to create a plan which is balanced. So there are some recovery phases, but if the athlete is drinking maybe 2 glasses of wine at night and watching soccer or football on TV right now and sleeping only 5-6 hours, this is not in my area. And these stressors definitely have a big impact on recovery. And these factors I can't, as I already said, I can't anticipate. And from there on, I think it's very important to as already said, to have a good connection to the athlete, good relation to the athlete, that he's reporting. Not only by loading up some files, some Garmin, Wahoo files, whatever. I would say it's more important to have some subjective parameters like RPE or maybe 2 or 3 words like maybe I felt like shit during that session, or I felt great. And having additional information about sleep, recovery, alcohol intake, maybe Tim's area like nutrition. If somebody is using is maybe on a low carb, high fat side, and he wants to maybe lose some weight, which is dump. If you're 8 weeks before an Ironman, you should take carbs as much as possible to handle that load. So all these factors I can't anticipate. As a coach, you're doing nothing else than prescribing training, or it's maybe an experimental application of training science. And you want you prescribe a stimulus and you hope that the athlete responds with a certain performance increase. But if that stimulus is correct or not correct, I don't know. Sometimes we are a little bit more on the black box side. So we definitely need that reporting from the athlete in terms of a training diary, just to make sure that the stimulus is correct, that the athlete is able to handle that load without being over the edge. And so for me, coaching is definitely a most important fact is, or most important thing is communication. So if you don't have a communication relationship to the athlete, it doesn't work.
And do you find those that are a bit more prone to it are those that perhaps don't necessarily have, say, intensity control or things like that? Because I suppose I've lived in triathlon quite some time in cycling, and we get the weekend warriors and the age group that go out and do tempo a lot, and some self-coached, some have coaches as well. Do we find that those type of personalities are a little bit more prone to it and don't necessarily progress and always kind of live in this fatigued state? maybe just be a little bit more susceptible to going over the edge a little bit?
I mean, triathlon is, so many athletes are training with the concept of no pain, no gain. They train too much, and sometimes they look at Strava, what some pros are training, and they neglect the fact that pro is just training and recovering, and they have to cope with everyday life, like going to work and having a family, and so they try to copy that amount of training which pros are loading up to Strava, and this is a big problem. And there may be some alpha guys, I call them alpha guys, some athletes who really want to hurt themselves in every single session, and they are a little bit more prone to overtraining or overreaching because they don't have a good intensity control. For an example, if I know that an athlete is like an alpha guy, I would lower maybe the intensity, but from my side, if I want to ride, if I want him to ride 200 watts, and I know this is an alpha guy, I would prescribe 180 watts because I know he is doing 20 watts plus every time. So in the end, he's riding with 200. And on the other side, there are some, maybe some shy guys. They don't want to feel any so-called pain in training. And if I want to have that guy riding 200 watts, and I would prescribe 220 watts because he's a little bit doing lower on the easy side. And character or personality is a big influential factor in coaching or in training. So you have to know what's the person behind that athlete, and it's not only on a physiological side; it's more on a character personality side, and you have to combine it both. I think, and. On another group is maybe women. Sometimes they are a little bit more on the energy deficit side. They don't eat too much, and they have an energy deficit, which leads to suboptimal stimulus, leading to longer recovery times, and from week to week, we are maybe in that downward circle.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing that you've brought up there, because there's been lots of efforts recently to support female athletes from that perspective, and lots of research whereby in the past there has been I would say psychological issues around body composition and things like that of what an athlete looks like, but we're starting to try to get away from that in the female athlete field to say that everyone has a different body type, and that's okay, and supporting that by eating the correct amount of energy is only going to make you perform better in the long term. So, a real important factor there. So just quickly before, we move actually onto the influence of nutrition, because that was a good point there about the importance of that and recovery. But for the listeners out there who perhaps, not looked after as well as your athletes, or, they might be self-coached, what things, what are the best things that we can do to try and avoid getting into this high state of fatigue?
So I'm not a big fan of doing that periodization stuff, like having a base phase, a build phase, peak phase, whatever, because from my perspective, it's too rigid. And if you separate the whole season into that kind of phases and you stick to it without adjusting it, there's a higher chance of having a suboptimal stimulus. From my perspective, periodization has to be in a very short time window. That means the yesterday has an impact of today's training, and today's training has an impact on tomorrow's training. This is my way of periodization. It's only in a very short period of time, because if the athlete is, I can't anticipate if the athlete is injury free or without any sickness, and I don't know, I can't anticipate the weather in the upcoming week. So from my perspective, it doesn't make sense to plan longer ahead than 1 week. So, and if you do it like this, and you have a good balance between load and deload, or load and recovery, and you know the influential factors of each discipline in triathlon, swimming, cycling, running, which is slightly different to only cycling. So, and you know the interactions and these influential factors, then you can avoid being in that state of overreaching or non-functional overreaching. I distinguish between acute fatigue, functional overreaching, non-functional overreaching, and from there on, it's maybe overtraining if it still exists. And acute fatigue is for sure if you do a long run, maybe today 2 hours run, and you're acute fatigued, it's clear. But if you have maybe 3-4 days of higher load, you're maybe in a functional overreaching scenario. And from there on, if the stimulus is high without having recovery periods in between, then you accumulate maybe fatigue, and from there on, maybe it could be a non-functional overreaching. I think calories or carbs, it's important, and sleep. I mean, everybody is looking for recovery tools in all different ways. And the easiest way is sleeping, you know. But the traditional triathletes, it is, and then the average triathlete, he wants to buy anything and wants to spend some money on recovery tools. And there was a big study in Germany. It's called RECMAN, Regeneration Management. It was a very big study, and the conclusion at the end, it says that every single recovery tool has its role, but in the end, it depends what you're looking for, and how the reaction of the body is not in general the same. So, but at the end, the main factor, as you mentioned, Alex, is sleep. And if you reduce the amount of sleep, it doesn't make any sense. Age groupers training maybe 2 or 3 times a day, and work in between, and so they have a really hectic lifestyle, a really tight schedule, and they have to do the first session before going to work. They should really think about maybe skipping sometimes a workout just to make sure that they get the right amount of sleep. If for instance, if you want to swim at 6 in the morning, you have to wake up maybe at around 5, driving to the pool and having maybe some quick breakfast, but if you fall asleep maybe at 11 o'clock, so you have 6 hours of sleep, it doesn't make sense in every single phase of the year.
And over the long term, you know, that has quite a detrimental effect. And as you know, I both know, having kids disrupts that for sure. And you feel that when you try and train. But yeah, so what we touched on, you know, some of those influences, and a big part of that is sleep, as we've just mentioned. But another big part of recovery is nutrition as well. And I'm going to bring Tim into the conversation here, and just kind of explain to us the influence that nutrition in general can have on our fatigue levels and our ability to have consistent training.
Well, just get ketones and then you're sorted. No overtraining.
That's a good answer.
Tim, I thought it was hazelnuts.
Oh, no, it's ketones now.
Okay.
Joking aside, but like I think that the most important things that people kind of forget and is basically the fundamentals to get the energy back into the system and get ready in front of the training sessions for what they are going to undergo. And it's about like the basic nutrients, so carbohydrates, then protein, and then fat in this order. And then only then we can start talking about the supplements, I feel like. And I kind of still get this impression that athletes, especially amateurs athletes, are trying to find shortcuts, and they're just like thinking, oh, what can I take to recover better? But then at the same time, they're not eating that big bowl of pasta or rice before training, and then they suffer in training, and then what can I do to recover better? And then you get this, I don't know, smoothies or anything that perhaps not the best in that particular scenario. And the recovery shakes with a lot of protein, but then not enough carbohydrates. And it's always this weight loss strategy that comes alongside as well. They want to train hard to lose also body fat, and then they don't eat enough, and it's just like a vicious cycle of just basically like not not being able to recover properly for the next training session. And if you're not properly recovered, then you basically don't adapt. So I think like what the training is basically like you cause some changes in the cellular environment, and the cells respond, and then you get like mitochondrial growth or improved function. And you need to basically build these proteins and these organelles. How is it, Alex?
I would say organelles.
Okay.
I mean, that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah. You need to build them, and the building blocks are basically like the proteins probably, but then you also need energy for that, so carbohydrates. So you need to understand this in this context. It's not just like, oh, now it's going to happen, the super compensation is going to happen. Well, it's not going to happen if you have the resources for this to take place. So you need time, meaning the recovery time, and you need the nutrients. It's as simple as that.
And what, for the listeners, what, I know it's not as straightforward as this, especially when there's multiple trainings, but what sort of things should people be focusing on? Are we, I suppose, breaking it down into distinct phases? We've got pre-training or outside of training, we've got during the training, and we've got post-training. And especially if, like the long distance athletes, they're doing 2 training, you're always going to be in one of those, because it's either before your swim in the morning, during your swim after, and then you're at work, you might have your lunch, and then again, you're back into those phases. So, without, I suppose, overcomplicating it, I know we can get a bit more complex in eating the right things at the right time, but what are the real fundamentals that we want to focus on to avoid these situations?
I feel like when you're preparing, like it's like preparing a bag for like going swimming. So in the evening before you go to the next day, if you're working, then you prepare your bag for swimming in the morning. You then get your bike ready for the afternoon, because you will want to start training just when you get home. It's the same with nutrition. So you need to like kind of plan for the next day already a day in advance, at least a day in advance, to like start thinking, okay, so tomorrow I have double session. I have a swim in the morning, and I have a whatever kind of a bike or a run session in the afternoon. So what do I do today to basically support the training for tomorrow? So you can get the food ready on the day, like in terms of like, oh, today I need to eat a lot because tomorrow it's a hard day, so I will need more carbohydrates, almost glycogen loading for training. But then also like, oh, what will I have before the swim the next morning? What will I have after the early morning swim? Because you don't have time in the morning to prepare a proper meal. And start thinking like a day in advance, because the worst is that basically like these working people rush to work after the swim, don't have time for a meal, and then, oh, it's afternoon, it's 5 o'clock, you rush home, and then, oh, let's just go jump on the bike because then it's going to be late and dark and you can't train. So again, you miss another meal, and then it's evening, and then you open the fridge, come home completely exhausted, and you eat everything you find in the fridge, which is probably not the best idea.
Yeah. And what's your viewpoint? Sorry, Mario. I was going to say, what's your viewpoint? And you may be able to answer some of this as well, Mario, and what you see with your athletes. But because we have, age groupers tend to be the most busiest, elite athletes have time to prepare because they're at home or they're somewhere where they've got a kitchen and things. But I think sometimes what certainly I've seen in those populations is maybe they're a little bit too scared to sometimes say have some whey protein and some carbohydrates straight afterwards, because of we always try and strive for this food first approach, which we always should do, but we're at the realms here of whether if we eat nothing, is that worse for us than actually, say, having some whey protein and some Haribo in that post-exercise period so that we can have replenishment? What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's, I think, like in these age groupers, I think it's a big problem because these people are highly influenced by what society is saying is healthy nutrition. And then healthy nutrition, you see high fat foods like avocado, have a salad, have an omelette, and this culinary that is basically high in fat. And you don't want fat, or at least sometimes you want pure carbohydrates. And then you keep getting bombarded with the fact that with the idea that, Haribo and the simple sugars are going to give you diabetes. And then you have a bit of a problem with how you approach the nutrition. And then people are scared of simple sugars. They opt for more foods high in fat, and then they don't get enough carbohydrates. And that's a big issue. And yes, before training or after training, sugars are your friends. Just eat them.
And do you see, Mario, resistance to some of this in some of the athletes that you work with, or how have you observed that?
First of all, I want to come back to maybe 1 minute when Tim was talking about planning. I can see definitely a strong correlation between successful athletes and their planning habitus, maybe. So athletes who really plan the week, and not only in terms of equipment and food, they have a higher chance to be successful. This is definitely a strong correlation. Chaotic athletes, they forget their goggles or their swimming pants or whatever, and they are not focusing on the correct food, and they have a higher potential of failure, maybe, first of all. And eating is sometimes like a religion, if you look on Twitter, if you see Tim Noakes and Asker Jordan-Trup, or Tim Noakes and Dan Clues from New Zealand and all these guys, they are very contrary with their ideas or concepts. It's sometimes hard to find out what's wrong or what's right. And if you talk to somebody who's maybe vegan, this is I'm not vegan, and I'm not against being vegan, but this is sometimes very hard to discuss or educate these athletes, because they have a certain they have got certain ideas in their mind, and they are not free in their mind to learn something new. And this is sometimes hard, and there is still some kind of thing that athletes are afraid of fructose. It's still there, because the fructose has a high potential of increasing diabetes, and they sometimes neglect the fact that they are athletes, that they need the sugar for locomotion, and the studies in trivia or the articles in trivia magazines, they say fructose is bad. But I mean, fructose is bad if you're sedentary, if you're all day sitting in the office like me right now. This definitely have a potential of health risk. But an athlete, I don't get it, because you can use the energy for locomotion which you took in before, and it's a quite simple equation. But people think that they can get energy out of something miracle way, like I don't know where it comes from. Maybe by consuming ketones or consuming air, and this is still in people's mind.
I think I came across not so long back a fantastic infographic. I think it was from Asker actually, which seems to be the more kind of level playing field in terms of his views, his abstract views. But there's a real fascinating one that showed some of the things are the simple sugars, glucose, fructose, that we eat as athletes quite commonly, and there was two pathways, and one is if you're sedentary, and one is if you're an athlete. To make this side, the sedentary person is in an energy surplus, and we know energy surplus is bad for us in general. But we're talking about high performing, enormous energy output athletes that require that. And therefore on this side, it's absolutely fine. So it's almost, we're working with a completely different population to what general public are doing. And a lot of research, or, some certainly clinical research in metabolic disorders and things like that are done on general population, the sedentary population. And yes, of course, if we stopped training and we ate the same amount of good food, we'd probably still get, towards that, but just a little bit slower. So yeah, that kind of psychological outlook can be quite challenging in just making sure that people do have enough to support that. But let's say, I suppose go back to it. Let's say we do get into this high state of fatigue, either whether we're overreaching or we've gone a little bit further. What would we look to do then? And maybe Tim can start on this, and we can go to what you've perhaps done with some athletes in practical application. Let's say we're in that state. What are the things that we're going to think about from a nutritional perspective?
Well, first you need to figure out whether nutrition is actually the problem. Are you basically under consuming, I don't know, carbohydrates? Is is your diet okay? Because sometimes the diet is okay, but you just are underperforming in training for other reasons. That's not food related. I experienced it myself. I got tired because I was so stressed at work that basically I was not recovering well. I was eating well, anything, which is you couldn't do my training sessions properly because I was so stressed at work. And this is a big difference between me and a professional athlete, which basically only cares about training, and I have life outside my sport. And this sometimes you need to appreciate and understand. Okay, it's time for perhaps not the best idea to do high intensity intervals because, you might fail them. And people get frustrated. I was definitely super frustrated when I failed my intervals that coach prescribes. And I did my fueling 100% the day before. I fueled the intervals well, but I just couldn't do them. So you need to kind of figure out what the issue is. And I think this is what Mario was saying earlier about the feedback from the training. I think that's really important. I never gave feedback to my coach because I was he doesn't need the feedback. But then even I start thinking when I work with athletes, I always ask for feedback oh, how do you feel today? And they look at me sometimes why are you asking? Come on, you have all the information in Training Peaks with all the data files. Why are you asking me how I feel before you tell me the number for dinner? But I want to see is he recovering well or not? Like, how are my calculations? Because any plan or any calculations you do is basically like just mathematics in your head, and it can be wrong because nothing is as accurate in like metabolism or like in human beings. Everything is variable. So yeah, this is kind of the things that you need to kind of think about always when you're dealing with kind of athletes, I think.
And would we, let's say an athlete then came to you and said, I'm super tired, been tired for a few days, or maybe I've just been tired all this week, and you couldn't find any particular reason, work-life balance was fine and they were just tired, would you then say, well, we need to take more carbohydrates, we need to focus on protein? How would we approach that from a nutritional perspective?
Yeah, probably try to get more carbohydrates in. But then one of the things that I often I experienced, I think last year myself, I was weak for weeks, and the whole spring or something, I was weak. And then one of my athletes was feeling very similar. He was actually I think a continental team rider. And at some point I was like, he kept complaining that he was weak, and I was talking to coach, and coach was like, yeah, I have no idea what it is. And I thought nutrition was fine, the coaching was fine, everything seemed fine. And then at some point I was like, oh, did you do the blood test and do you know the results for iron? And no, he didn't do it, because I thought the coach would take care of that, but the coach didn't, and I didn't take care of that either. The team doctor didn't take care of that either. So yeah, and in the end, he was low in iron, and I suspect that I was low in iron as well, because then I ordered iron pills for myself, and then I felt better.
I've been there in the past too.
Excellent.
And how for Mario as well, do you see different changes in your athletes on how, it affects their eating when they become fatigued? Do you see things change there?
Yeah, I've seen by myself, and when I talked to the athletes, they have more cravings for sweets. When I was cyclist and I was totally exhausted, I can't stand Nutella. I woke up during the night because I was not sleeping that good, and I have to eat Nutella. I mean, it ruined my teeth almost, but I had that excessive craving for sweets during the night, and maybe this is one thing I can definitely see when I talk to athletes, that they have the same symptoms, and as I already said, restless sleep or trouble falling asleep. This is a bad sign. Sometimes it's because if you swim maybe with a club at night, starting at 8 o'clock the session, and you finish the swim session at 10 o'clock, and you're totally full of adrenaline, and the resting heart rate is high, so you can't calm down without alcohol maybe, and so this is a problem. You see elevated heart rate in rest, sometimes an enormous drop in heart rate during the performance, not only a slightly decrease, which is maybe a sign of being more economic. This is an extreme drop, restless sleep, falling asleep. What else? Sometimes they have how do you say? Is it herpes in English? Herpes.
Yeah. So
on the lip, on the lip. Yeah. And on the other hand, sometimes the loss of appetite. They can't eat because they are too stressed out. Maybe some of them feel more depressed, or some of them they are right on fire if something goes wrong, and they are not in a relaxed mood. They are a little bit more in a fighting mood. Yeah, HRV is one factor you should take into account. I'm not a big fan of HRV as a singular marker. It's just a tool or just a concept. I prefer talking to the athletes. So my best tool for measuring the load is the tongue and the ear. So I'm to talk to the athletes and listen to the athletes. Another one is maybe some burning sensation in the leg. If you wake up morning and you should be fresh after sleeping, and you go the stairs downwards and or upwards, and you feel some kind of burning sensation, this is not a good sign. And if you're in training camp, do you know the breakfast test in a camp? If you observe athletes going to the breakfast buffet, and you can definitely see during a camp of 2 weeks, you can definitely see a change in how they walk to the breakfast buffet.
And
never. Okay. Yeah, they're getting slower, and they're a little bit more crunched from day to day, so a little bit more fatigued. And I observed in training camps, the first few days they're eating healthy, and after maybe day 5 or day 6, they're eating only shit. It doesn't matter if it's healthy or not healthy. It's only they care about calories, nothing else. And you can definitely see a change in the habits of eating.
I think that's, I don't know if, in Germany or back home for you, Tim, Slovenia, there's certainly this mentality that we see in the UK that is to indulge. And I'm not saying that the calories are not warranted, but it's like, yeah, I've been out for a long time on the bike today, and there's almost this right to indulge in bad food. And whilst, you're probably not, even no matter how much you eat, you're probably not going to make that caloric deficit up, but that's going to have such a big impact on how we recover, the quality of the food that's going in from nutrient, macro and micronutrients, going forwards. And I don't know if you guys have had experience of that, but it's definitely something that I sit and watch sometimes after, say, a long ride, or it's been a big day, and it's like just people just indulging all the cake and all things like that. And it's like, well, I've earned it, but reward yourself by looking after yourself. Like, you've done the tough bit, and just eat some good food so that you feel good. And that's just kind of one of my things. And I feel like a bit of it's not a hypocrite. Like, I have cake and stuff when I finish riding and stuff, but I think there's just this common mentality of overindulging. Like, that might be once a month that, we go to a cafe and it's like, yeah, I'm going to have some cake. But, the rest of the time you focus on replenishment and things like that. So do you guys see that as well?
Yeah. A friend of mine, he was a former pro cyclist in the early 2000s, and he said, if I do a training ride longer than 200K, I reward myself by eating a bag of potato chips. And he trained five times a week more than 200K, so he ate 5 bags of potato chips during a week. This is not maybe the healthiest way of eating, but I mean, in the 2000s it was totally different to now. Tim can definitely say something about it. But when I was pro cyclist, we didn't care about nutrition. It was just eating and almost avoiding eating during a ride. So sometimes if you do 5 or 6 hours, I couldn't see the road anymore because my blood sugar was below 0. But I made it. But I always wondered why I was the day after that ride, I was totally fatigued and I couldn't perform in any way. I mean, I was totally done. And and there was no focus on nutrition, even on training. 20 years ago, we just rode our bikes. We didn't train. There was no training concept behind. There was no coach in the team. There was just riding the bike, and on the weekends and sometimes during the week you did some racing. That's it. and in between you did 5 hours of riding, just riding the bike. It's slightly different nowadays, I think.
And in fact, that's just actually sprung a question into my mind as well. Is that another thing that we often see from age group and population and people who have jobs and kind of time strapped in what they do, is that we often see fasted riding as well. Not skipping breakfast and maybe to get to the pool because you can't eat that early, or you can't. You just don't have the time to do that. And I suppose from a nutrition and an energy and a fatigue perspective, are there any problems that occur from that? Let's say we are able to consume what we need during the day. We just don't eat that before the first session from a fasted position. Do we see any problems or elevation of risk in fatigue or overreaching in that?
I think so. I would say yes. Although I train 4 or 5 times a week. So during the week, I always train super early in the morning, waking up at 5 and just jumping straight on the bike without having a breakfast. But then I'm pretty careful on how I think about the day before. So that kind of have almost the breakfast amount of carbohydrates already at dinner, and then I make sure that if I'm doing some kind of interval session in the morning, then I have carbohydrates during in larger amounts than I would otherwise have. And it kind of interval trainings and everything works. But I think the problem is that people don't eat enough then the evening before, or then don't have enough simple carbs. And then basically, and they wake up in the morning and don't have enough glycogen. And then, they fail the training, or the training session it's supposed to be easy. It's not easy. And then it just continues into the day. And it's also sometimes a problem then if you do a fasted ride and you really need to take care of nutrition after that ride. That becomes really, really important. Because for the rest of the day, you will probably need more carbohydrates because, you were double empty in the morning, not single empty.
And of course, that overnight fast, it loses some of that liver glycogen as well.
Yeah.
So glucose and fructose, the fructose part, as we spoke before, is going to be an important part of that, in that session.
Yeah, exactly.
And if the athlete is rushing after that athlete to work and doesn't have time for solid food, and he is in a hurry, he didn't eat enough, so he will take that emptying factor through the whole day. So if he wants to train twice a day, then the second session will be from a quality perspective much worse, I think. So I'm not a big fan of doing fasted training. People think that they have a higher fat oxidation rate, etc., and they can lose weight or whatsoever. And I'm not a big fan of it, because my main credo or approach is the consistency or continuity of the specific stimulus which you need for that certain race format. If you want to do an Ironman, for sure you need the different training sessions than if you want to compete in the WTS triathlon series. And so the main focus should be that you are able to train very frequently, once a day, twice a day, almost every day, if you have the time budget for it, and to make sure that every single session has the highest possible quality. And for having the highest possible quality doesn't mean intensity. People think that base endurance training, easy training, doesn't have any kind of quality. It's for me, it's the highest quality, because if you want to compete in the Ironman, you need a good working fat metabolism, and you need certain hours to develop it. And I don't like that key sentence, quality before quantity. And quantity is quality, volume is quality from my perspective. And so if you have a deficit in calories or in carbs, and you're not able to have the highest possible quality in training, you don't get the adaptations you're looking for. And so I'm not a big fan of fasted training. I try to avoid it and try to say don't do it. Don't do it fasted. Having maybe a carb drink right before the swim session in the morning. If you go by bike or by car to the pool, have a quick sip of 50 grams of carbs, etc. That would be much easier, I think, or much better.
Yeah, I would agree. I only do it just because I don't have time in the morning. So I want to go to work as early as possible. And that's the only way I do it. But I would, whenever I work with athletes, I never recommend this because I don't get any gains by doing this. It's just for the sake of doing it. And this is my habit. So yeah. So I don't think, for probably no athletes that I work with, professionally, I recommend fasted training rides, and we don't do any fasted rides with professional athletes that I work with. So here it is.
And just kind of to, I suppose, elaborate on the whole fasted side and the fatigue. This is a question for Tim, actually. Do we see any changes in metabolism as we perhaps are in that overreached or over fatigued state or under recovered state, if we want to call it that? Do we see, any suppression in, carbohydrate metabolism or fat metabolism? Is there anything that changes there that might influence not only how we feel, how we perform, and how we might eat?
I think it was actually Asker Jokindrup during his, I don't know, even master's or PhD days. So in late 90s, late 90s, when he published a study looking at lactate values and metabolism in kind of overtrained athletes. And yeah, what happened was lactate values were lower. And if you look at lactate threshold curve, lactate curve for a graded exercise test, you will see, oh, this athlete is actually better because at the same intensity, the lactate values are lower. But no, it's actually this athlete was so suppressed in the carbohydrate metabolism that there was probably no glycogen in the muscles, and he was fatigued. And yeah, you can see this very clearly. And sometimes when you see an abrupt decrease in lactate for the same power output, you have to start thinking, oh, perhaps this is not adaptation to training. It's actually that I'm a bit too fatigued. So yeah, there are changes. Yeah.
It's funny because of the Norwegian hype train, as it's called. There are so many athletes using a lactate meter. I don't know if they know what they are measuring there, and some of them just showing the displays of the lactate meter on social media, and if it's a low number, it's a good number, and this isn't correct. So sometimes it's so funny to see that athletes are jumping on that hype train without knowing anything about it, and this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, from gadgets to nutrition, that is out there at the minute. That is difficult for athletes. It's really difficult for talking about yourselves, you've got experience of that, but for the general public, there's the influence of marketing and everything else that is designed to sell it and designed to influence people. And, it's not necessarily their fault for falling into that trap, but until you kind of understand why and what you're going to use it for, then, what kind of use is it? And then, of course, we know that there's some things out there that, are incorrect, let's say.
2 years ago, and I was at the Yam in Hawaii, in Kona, and I was standing on the highway maybe 4 or 5 days before the race, and I was witnessing all these athletes stopping, putting out the lactate meter out of the back of the jersey pocket, and took some measurements. it was ridiculous. Everybody was trying to copy the Norwegian way, but without knowing what they are really measuring.
They might have a concept
just for the sake of measuring.
Yeah.
Well, do you see these days also athletes with VO2 masks training? Because it's also what Norwegians are doing.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many gadgets out there, and So do the basics right. If you're focused on the basics and you do the basics right, and having consistency in training and carbs in training, and then I don't think there's a need for all these gadgets out there. If you sometimes it sounds conservative or boring if you rely on the basics, but if you do the basics right, the champions do always the basics right, and they are not focused on the last 1%. It doesn't make sense if you look for the marginal gains if you neglect the first 99% or do the 99% wrong. And this is a big problem because of social media or democracy of knowledge. Everybody has the chance to get the knowledge, but to interpret the knowledge or the studies or articles and transfer it to practical application. This is the main problem, because there are so many articles out there, and there's so many podcasts and etc. And sometimes I can't handle it anymore because it's too much. It's too much information.
So
you have to, it's overload. You have to try to focus what's wrong and what's right, or what's important, what's not so important.
I think that's, I coach as well, and Tim works with athletes and yourself, and I think that just resonates throughout and is, a real great way to conclude, this conversation, in the sense that mastering the fundamentals is just key to that success, and whether that be training, whether that be nutrition or both, around that is often what we see in those who go on to perform well, whatever degree that will be, from elite athletes to, masters, veterans, things like that, doing the basics and the fundamentals right. So just to kind of finish then, what, on the topic of overtraining, overreaching, what are your key things that the listeners can take away to, I suppose, avoid it and just have good success with their training? And I know it's not black and white of that. You need a nice progressive training schedule. But what are some of the key things that the listeners can do and take away into their own training and their daily life? Avoid
monster epic sessions for Instagram. And do the basics. Do the basics right. Consistency is key. I mean, it's everybody saying it, but in the end, that's the main principle. Consistency, and train for performances in races, and not training for performances for Strava or for Instagram. It's ridiculous. People are training for training and not training for racing, and so maybe it hasn't to be as hard as possible. It could be easy. Sometimes an easy training has a bigger impact or bigger influence on performance gain than a hard session, and know the demands of the race and try to get that certain stimulus for that demands as often as possible. That's my conclusion at the end. Sometimes it's boring. Training is boring, and it hasn't to be very sophisticated or super hard or whatever. It's much easier than most people think. And sometimes they ask me about some examples out of a professional triathlon training plan, or a plan for professionals, and they say it's so easy. Is that the correct plan? I said, yeah, it's easy. It's not so sophisticated or so complicated as people think. Yeah.
And
if you know the principles behind, and you have now it's over to Tim, the correct amount of energy or the correct amount of carbs, you're almost unbeatable.
There we go. That's the key to unlocking success right there. Well, we'd obviously love to chat much more, and we'd love to have you on the podcast again, because I'm sure there's so many other things that we could discuss. But huge thank you for coming on. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope our listeners enjoy it too and can take some things away into their own training. And I suppose a goodbye from Tim and myself. Thanks for listening to everyone, and we'll speak soon. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.